Hey there, I'm Jonathan, if that's even possible. Most likely. And this is definitely innerVIVID, and we're coming to you from the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people, lands never ceded. Because I think and talk a lot about things to do with spirituality with people, I hear all kinds of comments about it. A heap of people are pro-spirituality once they work out what that thing actually is. A lot of people are kind of indifferent, especially if there's something good happening on TikTok. And there's also people who are against it for all kinds of reasons. One of these reasons is that some complain that people just believe this stuff as a kind of a crutch, like a support because things are tough. Now that does sound okay to me. But yes, for some people, it's a criticism. So according to the International United Nations rules on being annoyed about things, it's time for a right of reply. Or maybe we'll just ask some people this question and see what happens. This is a good one.
Some say that believing in a higher power is just a way for human beings to avoid responsibility for bad things. Discuss.
Yeah, well, humans are always looking for a cop-out, and so yes, there is a version of believing in a higher power that can be the cop-out for bad things, anything, taking responsibility. And so yeah, we can abrogate responsibility by saying, oh well, God's in charge, God will fix it. I've heard that argument about climate change, and it's really quite frustrating when people say, oh well, God won't let that happen. God promised to never let the seas get past their boundary ever again, so climate change ain't going to happen. So yeah, that's very frustrating when people use that sense to use it as a way of abrogating responsibility, and it needs to be called out.
I think certainly believing in a higher power has been used for that, to make some people believe that there is indeed a punitive higher power or a punitive God to avoid or to keep in line. There's an element of transaction with a God who, if I do good things for, if I don't do bad things for, then that higher power will be satisfied. And that's not how I'm ready to come at a God who is loving and has given us this life in a gift-giving sort of way.
Am I allowed to swear? Bullshit. That's ridiculous. Are the things that happen that are human-caused but accidental, or human-caused and perhaps government-led, or whatever, we still have responsibilities there. We have to stand up and say that that's not right. I don't believe that God takes people from the earth because God needs another angel. That's not okay. It's not what love does. In fact, I believe the opposite, and that when those things happen, God's heart's the first to break, and God joins us in our grief. That's it. So, no, I call bullshit on that one.
Well, in my belief system, I understand that as human beings we have been granted free will. So although there might be a higher power, as human beings we have the power to make our own decisions, be that right or wrong. And so while we have that free will and we have the gift of discernment, which is how to decide what we feel is right and wrong, we have to take responsibility for that part of our lives. And so no, I don't think shafting all that responsibility to a higher power gives us any excuse for our own behaviours.
I'm not sure that we get away with avoiding responsibility for bad things. I think when I have tried to avoid responsibility, responsibility finds me anyway, and often in really unexpected and sometimes destructive ways. So if that's what a higher power was invented for, well, it was a pretty poor solution to the problem. It's not been my experience. I've heard people talk about God being a crutch too, that it's a sign of weakness, as though weakness is a bad thing. As I've said before, life is hard. Life throws all kinds of really difficult challenges at you. Bad things happen to good people and bad people, and to all the people in between. And I think it's amazing that we get through what we get through, and that we survive, and that most of us survive relatively psychologically intact. So I don't think that looking to something that is bigger than us is a crutch or scapegoating or anything like that. I think it's a really heartfelt attempt to make sense of life and the universe, and to reach out for support and strength and encouragement. And I think that's a really healthy response to the challenge of life, actually. Recognising that we can't solve all our problems and that we can't manage on our own is a healthy decision. So good on people for finding ways to cope with life. I think God is more than that, obviously. I think God offers far more than that. But it's not an unhealthy place to start.
Yeah, I think there's a real case for saying that. If I'm honest, I think there are people who will attribute to God things that don't need to be attributed to God. I think, therefore, there are times when people actually just say, oh, well, God did that, or it's an act of God that. And you think, well, no. Humans are actually causal for a lot of the suffering in the world. I find that one of the great things of faith is that not only does it ask you to look beyond the idea of some otherness or higher power or whatever you want to call it, but it gets you to be somewhat introspective and look inwards and think about what are the consequences of your actions and your words. And I think a lot of the time you have to go and say, be honest, we are the ones that mucked it up.
Yes and no, depending on the person. Some people just believe in God when things are really tough. We have nothing to do with God until things are really bad with us, and then we come to God and ask God to help us. And if things are good with us, we don't mind about God. But for me, I think God is always there. So what we have to do is just to open our eyes and see what God is doing in what is happening in our lives. And this is me, so I always believe in God.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I can understand it. I probably used to believe that sometimes myself when I went through a period of not being close to God during my 20s. I probably, the old God excuse, it's not your fault. I think as I've learned and studied a great deal about God, I actually think it's the opposite. I think that for me, that God wants me to answer for my bad decisions. So anything that goes wrong or anything that I do wrong, I actually believe I have to justify that. So for me, it is about being answerable to God, not letting God be the excuse.
I think believing in a higher power, is absolutely an excuse for bad behaviour, but it doesn't discount the presence and possibility of a higher power. I think whenever we've done something wrong, we're always looking for a scapegoat, somebody to blame. And if we can blame something that we're not sure that really exists, then that's a really good excuse. Oh, well, the devil made me do that, or God told me to do that. I do think that is a cop-out, though. And as much as I do think it is an excuse, for me, it doesn't limit the possibility of something more being possible and present. And that's why whenever I've done something wrong, the first person I want to blame is myself, and not something that might have made me do it, like a grand puppeteer in the sky. I don't believe in that type of God.
So yes, I think believing in a higher power or various higher powers can very often be a form of avoiding responsibility for the bad things in the world. This is essentially the Karl Marx, who's the 19th century philosopher economist. This is essentially his critique of religion. That for him, religion is a way of misrecognizing the cause of suffering in the world. That for Marx, ultimately, there's suffering in the world that doesn't need to be there, and the reason is because we have created that world. We've organized and arranged the world in such a way that certain terrible, bad things happen to lots and lots of people. And for Marx, kind of the sort of, realization that needs to happen is we've created the world and we can actually change the world. We have the power to collectively change the world. And for Marx, the problem with religion is that it puts up a kind of resistance to that. That very often religion says things like, well, these are the structures of the world because God or whoever says that they are the structures of the world. Or that this is the way the world is because this is how God created the world, because this is how, or some religious figure, ordained that the world be this way. And so it actually takes people away from the recognition that we collectively create the world. Like the world is what we make the world to be. And for Marx, you have to step outside of religion to actually have that realization. So I think Marx is pretty right about a lot of that. I would also add that it's not only religion that does that causes us to misrecognize why the world is structured the way that it is. Like lots of things can do that. I think believing in the authority of the nation state can also do that. That if you believe in the ultimate power and authority of America, for instance, that is also a way of disavowing responsibility for all kinds of terrible things that America does around the world, for instance. But the entertainment industry can do that. The way sport functions in people's lives can do that. So there's all a number of things that can kind of take people away from actually avoiding responsibility, or avowing or owning responsibility. But I would also say that I think certain spiritualities and certain religions also can actually do the opposite. They can contain a kind of internal critique of that gesture of religion itself, and open on to that question of let's create the world differently. So that impulse to create the world differently can actually come from within religion itself as well, I would say.
Conclusion. Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to say that. Okay, I think we've looked at this question from many angles, possibly even a panoply. Yes, that was my word for the day. Look it up. And I definitely agree with how Peter Catt says this is frustrating way back in the beginning. Because if you blame the way things are on a higher power / God, especially unequal or unfair things, then you never have to change anything for the better. That's awful thinking, arguably. But I like the general flow of what people have said here about actually you can be keen on the higher power idea, and it actually reminds you to be more accountable for stuff, not less. You hear people say, oh, I have no regrets at all. Like I'm not sorry about anything I've ever done. I kind of can't believe that. If you have no regrets, it's almost like saying everything I ever did was the perfect right thing to do in every situation. Can anyone really truthfully, honestly say that? No, we do have free will. I think we decided that in another video. So we got to take some responsibility for our stuff, right? So where are you sitting with all of this? Send your answers on a postcard to What the Heck is Jonathan Talking About This Time? PO Box THX 1138, which is a George Lucas reference. I thought of that myself. I think that's a pretty good one. Yeah.